When we designed our keyboards, we spent months researching and considering every decision we took. So for us, everything made perfect sense. However, there are some questions about those design decisions that keep coming up. So I brought our CEO, Luis, to answer them. Okay, let's jump right to it. Why are there so many thumb keys on the Dygma Defy?
When we were designing the Defy, we actually tested with many users, and we discovered that there's different ways of angling your arms in relationship to the center of the keyboard. At the same time, there's smaller hands and larger hands, and some people claw their hands when they are typing, and other kind of have their fingers in a flat way, right? So the combination of all of this made it so the position, the alignment of the thumb is different for everyone, right? So when we were designing the thumb keys, we wanted to have at least 4 comfortable thumb keys for any hand size, any hand alignment, any way of typing. So that's why there are so many keys. You don't really need to use them all. You need to figure out which ones are the most comfortable for you. So maybe if you have a small hand, maybe the inner keys are more comfortable. But maybe if you have a large hand, maybe the outer keys will be more comfortable. If you have a very flexible thumb, let's say, maybe it's not 4, maybe it's 5, 6, 7, or maybe the 8 keys will be comfortable for you. So actually, here what we're creating is optionality. Depending on your way of typing, your hand size, and alignment with the keyboard, etc., then you will find which 4 keys are the best for you.
But many people ask, why didn't we continue the thumb cluster and we added a modifier row here?
So from an ergonomic standpoint, having the keys on the lower row and having to hit with the pinky, it's not ideal. And actually what usually happens is, let's say that I want to do Control 5. People would do Control 5. But actually, the reason these modifiers are on both sides is because you should do Control 5. So this way you're not twisting your wrists in weird ways, and you're not clawing your hand. And this gets much worse if you do Control Alt 5, is when you start doing gymnastics, yes, with your wrists and your fingers, right? And if we take that into account, and also that we have many thumb keys and we can create many layers and we can configure any modifier in any location in any layer, this makes it so that, for example, if you have Control here and Shift here and Alt here, then you can already do what you would do kind of with these weird gymnastics. So you could decide if you want to have modifiers on the left, on the right, on both, and you can always have your hands in a very comfortable position where your fingers are in the home row and maybe you're moving your thumb 1 unit away from the home row position. So from an ergonomic standpoint, we believe it's much better for the user.
Yeah, something that I think you do and I think is very interesting is that if you have modifiers together on the thumb cluster, you can press 2 of them with the same thumb.
Yeah, actually in my layout I have Shift here and Control or Command here, and actually I have Alt in this position, in this key. So I would press both of Shift and Control at the same time, but I would even press Control Shift Alt at the same time, right? So for me this is so much more comfortable than having the modifiers here, even the Shift, and having to do all these weird hand positions.
Okay, so switching up a little bit, another question that we get a lot is, why are the palm rests not detachable?
Okay, so there's 2 reasons why we don't have detachable palm rests. The first one, if we wouldn't have this area, then when you lay down your hands on top of the keyboard, your wrist wouldn't be at neutral angle. So that's worse from an ergonomic standpoint.
Yes, because if your wrist is resting on the desk and the keyboard is really high, you're gonna be suffering from wrist extension, and that makes your wrist hurt in the long run.
Although you could have detachable palm rests, so you could eventually have that 0 degree angle on your wrist. But the one that you cannot really dodge is that if you're denting your keyboard and you don't have a palm rest, first of all, you couldn't really do this. You would need to have the 2 little legs together, right? But if not, your hand would be floating. You could not really rest in this position. And if it's going to be floating, then your chair has to be really high, and probably you're going to be loading your neck muscles, right? Your traps. So it's just less comfortable. Here it's a drawback. What do you prefer? To have a smaller footprint, but then the tenting is much more uncomfortable. From an ergonomic standpoint, and this is always what we've been focusing, is what's the best ergonomic solution? This is the best ergonomic design in this case.
So related to the palm rest, we have detachable palm pads that are made of soft silicone. But many people ask, why didn't we make this hard? maybe out of wood, like other palm rests and palm pads.
Usually the palm rests are to rest your hands, right? The lower part of your hands, right? So if you're resting on a hard surface for 8 hours plus a day for months or years, how comfortable this is. We believe that having a soft surface that is not extremely soft, but is soft enough to be kind of like having a little cushion makes it more comfortable. The palm pads of the race were much more, I wouldn't say like hardwood, but they were more dense. They were not soft like these ones. After using them for a long time, we actually reached the conclusion that a little bit softer, it would be more comfortable. So we tested with users and we tested internally for a very long time. Actually had to headbutt against suppliers for a long time because it's actually very difficult to find the softness in this thickness.
I was gonna say that making it out of wood would be much easier.
Much easier, yes. Making or hard plastic, wood, whatever material that is hard, it would be much easier. But this is more comfortable. So there's people that would maybe prefer wood or plastic palm rest. Yes, we all have different tastes, so there's different preferences. But for the vast majority of people, I believe that having a softer surface where to rest your hands for hours and hours, for months or years, it's more comfortable. So that's kind of the reason behind this comfort.
So another frequent question that we get is, why do we need a neuron? Why do we have to use this to connect it to the computer so we can use RF, and then we need to connect it to the back of the keyboard if we want to use Bluetooth? And some people complain, that they have to, remove the neuron here and connect it to the computer to use it wired or RF.
When we designed the race, the OG race, the reason we wanted to have a neuron is because we didn't want to have a master-slave situation in the keyboard. This would mean that, let's say, if the vast majority of people are right-handed, let's say 85% of people, then it would make sense to have the master in the left hand, because this means that you would be able to remove the right side and then have your mouse, right? But then if we would do this, there's two things. One, you would have a cable that goes from one keyboard to another, and then a cable that goes to the computer. And if you're left-handed, you wouldn't be able to just remove the left side and have the mouse there, right? So that's why we decided to, okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to create this little thing that is going to be the master. So both keyboards are slaves to this master. And this way, if you're right-handed or left-handed, you can always detach one of them. And you can have this Y cable situation instead of having one cable from one side and then going to the other side or going to the computer. Then when we designed the Defy, we added Bluetooth and RF. And we were thinking, how can we make this UX work, right? And okay, let's go back to square one. So imagine that we don't want to have the neuron. So if we want to have a cable experience, again, we will need to have a master and a slave that we don't want to, because then, if not, left-handed people will have a worse user experience. And at the same time, we will have this cable that is going from one side to the other, something that we don't want to have. Okay, so we want to avoid that. So then it seems like the original decision of having a neuron makes sense. But now how can we make it so it works in Bluetooth and in RF? And actually, that was quite challenging from a technological standpoint. It would have been much easier to not have a neuron. But the solution was, if the neuron is the brain of the keyboard, it must be inside the keyboard. Because if not, Bluetooth wouldn't work. So actually, when the neuron is inside the left side of the keyboard, we have the right side communicating with radio frequency to the left side, and then the left side being the brain of both, because the brain is inside the left side communicating with the computer. And then the next situation is RF, because this is the brain. This is like connecting the dongle to the computer. So you connect the dongle, so with a cable, you connect it to the computer. Maybe this seems a little bit over-engineered, and it could be, but this is the only way that we can tick all the boxes that we wanted.
If this seemed a little bit complex, we've made a full video explaining how we decided to make this configuration and all the troubles that we went through to make this work. Another question that we get a lot is, why do we have MX switches for the whole keyboard, but low-profile choke switches for the bottom row of the thumb clasp?
If we check it from the side, we can see that there's this, let's say, step, right? The MX switches are higher than the low-profile switches. If we wouldn't make it this way, then this would mean that we have MX switches here. If we have the MX switches here, then all the thumb keys will have the same height. And then if we hit the top key, we would accidentally hit the bottom key. So we've done it so you can hit the top key and the bottom key without misclicking on the lower one. So we believe that this was the kind of smartest design, although it made it more complicated because we had to create another PCB at a different height with a different switch. But kind of at the end of the day, all our questionable design decisions reach the same conclusion. What's the best from an ergonomic standpoint? What's going to be the most comfortable for the customer or the end user? And that's why we end up with these kind of like unconventional solutions.
If it makes it more complicated to manufacture.
Yes, exactly. Because Manel, our product designer, during the process of designing our keyboards, he was always questioning, hey, do we really need this? Because this is going to be more complicated, it's going to be more expensive. And yeah, we believe that we needed it. So that's why we make these calls for the product design.
Surprisingly, he still has hair on his head.
Yeah, not like us.
Not like us. And still talking about switches, our switches are north facing. And some people asked, why didn't we use south facing switches?
Okay, so there's two reasons. The main reason is that if you have the LED on the bottom side, the bottom row LEDs would be shining on the bottom side. And this means that they will be shining directly to your eyes, right? And the second one is that if we want to have LEDs so you can properly see the legends, then we prefer to have the legends on the top, because this way we don't block the legends with the fingers, because usually when you're resting your fingers, you're resting them kind of downwards in the keys, right? So it's easier to slide your fingers down than slide them up.
Even if you slide them up, you're covering them with the rest of the finger.
Yes, exactly. So, and basically these two reasons made it so our LEDs are on the top side.
There's another frequent question is, why did we add the underglow, which also costs extra on our keyboard? So is there a reason to buy it? Why would someone pay for that?
Okay, so I would say there's two reasons. One of them is aesthetics, that this is people think, okay, this is only for the aesthetics, right? Because if not, why it would be there? But actually, there's a second reason that it's quite useful, is that when you're changing layers with your peripheral vision, you will be able to see the layer change. So for example, exactly what you used right now. If you're looking at your screen and you change layers, you will be able to see how it glows, right? Okay, so in this case, I have a few dual function keys, right? So when I change layers, even if I'm not looking directly to a keyboard, I would be able to realize that I'm changing layers. So while you're learning how to use your layers, because usually you tweak multiple keys, you move them around, you change layers. Usually it's good to have, let's say, an underglow that's yellow, another one is blue, another one is pink, colors that are really different, right? So when you're cycling through the layers because you want to access arrows, F keys, numpad, whatever, this way you can know in what layer you are without having to look at the keyboard and look at the keys. So actually it's a quite helpful feature when you're starting to get used to a keyboard with multiple layers.
Like, I've been using these keyboards for years, right? But even so, I think having that underglow subconsciously helped me, because even just the tint of the light is slightly different, and I know that I'm in my number pad layer or something like that.
Yeah, because we're talking about peripheral vision and it kind of shines here directly, but actually it shines against whatever you have in front of you. So if you have, let's say, some items or books or whatever, or just the screen, it's gonna shine against it. So it's not only directly under you, but also actually in the front of you.
So another frequent question that we get is, especially with the Race 2, is why there is no F keys or arrow keys or maybe even an numpad.
When we made the race, the original race, this was the number one question. Everyone was asking why this decision. Two things. One of them, ergonomics. So this is kind of like the main topic all the time. What's better from an ergonomic standpoint? So from an ergonomic standpoint, let's say that we have a full-size keyboard and we want to do half tenting. So if we want to do tent this side would elevate this way, okay? So that's not very comfortable because you will have the right hand up here, right? And it would be kind of like a bridge. It would be massive. But let's say there's a more elegant solution that is splitting the numpad, right? So this way, the right side would tent and still you will have access to the numpad. This would make the keyboard even more expensive because you will have a third side of the keyboard detached, right? Also, at the end of the day, this keyboard has configurable layers. If you can already have your F keys and arrows and number pad wherever you want, why would you have it physically? The number one reason is because people are used to it. And we understand that, and that's a legit reason to not buy this keyboard and buy a regular keyboard, because they just want to have the keys where they are used to having them. But if we are thinking about, okay, you are going to relearn some keys because you want to maximize this keyboard. If you don't want to change the configuration at all, okay, yes, you're benefiting from the split and you're benefiting from having integrated palm rests and the tenting and so on. But that's kind of, I would say, 50% of the product. The hardware is 50% of the product, and the software is the other 50%, or the firmware plus software is the other 50%. It could be that you want to have your arrows in WASD because you're used to it on gaming, right? And moving your characters with it. But maybe you want to have them on IJKL on the right side. But if we had here the arrows, then this kind of defeats the purpose. Even though, of course, you have the options of having here the physical arrows and then having it by software. But then you will have a larger footprint, and then the keyboard would be larger, probably more expensive, etc. So even though it's a tough compromise, because we're removing keys that people are used to using, when you're used to these new positions of for the F keys, the numpad and the arrows, it's more comfortable. You won't want to go back to the original position of the arrows or the numpad, because moving your hand this way to use the arrows, it takes more time than just pressing a key and having the arrows here, right? Or if you want to use the numpad, the same thing. Let's say I press here and then I have my numpad. Instead of this, if I would need to move my hand, this is just slower. So even though it's a tough trade-off for most of people because they need to relearn how to use some keys, at the end of the day, if you're willing to spend this amount of money on a keyboard, probably it's because you're concerned about your productivity or about your health. And if this is the case, it's worth relearning where the F keys, the arrows, and the numpad is. So even though it was a kind of like tough trade-off, that's the logic behind it.
Yeah, for example, for me, the arrow keys, having them like right underneath my fingers makes it completely different.
Yes, and I think we've done some videos talking about the layers and how to maximize the arrows and so on. And with my layers and my arrows, I have a special layer that helps me fly through the documents, and I do a lot of editing in texts. Basically, I'm writing all day. I cannot imagine moving back into having to move my hand away to use
and your left hand to do use control, because I think you have a navigation layer where some of the arrows already have control on them, so you can move through paragraphs and whatnot.
Yeah, and I'm used to having my modifiers from the thumb keys and so on. So for me, it's like I don't have to move my hands from the position to use my arrows with control or command, with shift, alt, etc. So I have access to the advanced functionality without moving my hands from the home row. And that's amazing compared to having to move around and kind of like move much more the hands, right? There's a trade-off, but it's worth it. If you don't really want to go through the trade-off, okay, I can understand it, but maybe you're not so concerned about your productivity or your health, and that's completely valid, right? But if you want to kind of reach the kind of like the best on the productivity side and on the ergonomic side, having layers and readjusting your keys to whatever is comfortable for you is just the best solution.
So another question that we get since we introduced the Dygma Defy and the Dygma Race 2 is, why didn't we use the solution for the tenting that we used on the original race, which is a metal plate that is really sturdy with metal legs that you click into position, and and then you place this here and it feels like I throw you this and it will hurt.
Yeah,
right?
I will die if you hit me with this for sure. Yes.
So yeah, that's the question. Like, why didn't we use this solution and we went for something like we have on the Defy or the Race 2?
I think this solution is really like a tank, and that's kind of like the best part, right? It's a solution that it's very heavy because it's a metal plate with metal legs, and at the same time, it's 1 centimeter thick, right? So when you fold it, this is the lowest it gets. So if you always have your keyboard in some kind of a 20-30 degree or whatever, maybe you don't care or you don't mind. But if you're going to move it around or you want to change degrees or you want to put it at 0 degrees, this is an inconvenient.
Yes, and it only reaches 45 degrees.
Yeah, that actually 45 degrees is quite nice. But us being us, we wanted to make it better. And for us, better meant, okay, let's put this inside. So at 0 degrees, it's flat. And at the same time, let's have more degrees, because it starts at 10 and it ends at 45, and there's only 4 degrees, right? So we wanted to start at 5 and we wanted to reach 60. So then that's how we end up with this tenting design. It's not a tank. It's not as sturdy, but it's not designed to be a tank. This is a tank because it's this metal plates, right? But at the same time, I would say it's a less elegant solution. Maybe it's more sturdy, but it's less functional and less elegant. So
yeah, and I would say it's unnecessarily sturdy.
yes,
You don't need so much sturdiness.
I mean, you can stand on top of this tenting kit and it won't wobble.
Yeah.
You know, it will hold your 80 kilos or whatever. With this version, what we did is now you have from 5 degrees to 60 degrees, it's 8 positions, and at the same time you have reverse tilting. In the original race, the tip of the keyboard, sorry, the tip of the leg is squared, right? And this has the maximum surface against the desk, right? But in the Defy or the Race 2, it's rounded. And you could say, hey, this is worse, it has less surface. Yes, but the reason behind we did this is so we can have reverse tilting too. So we have reverse tilting of 5 degrees and 10 degrees. At the same time, we can have our leg on the bottom side or closer to our body, right? So we can have both of them out, and this way you can have your reverse tilting. So from a feature standpoint, yes, it's less robust, but you don't need a tank to type. Maybe if you would stand on top of it and jump, maybe it would make sense, right? But it's lighter, and you start at 5 instead of at 10, and you have more degrees, and at the same time you have reverse tilting. So the combination of all of this make it so it's a better product. It's only worse if you really need for some reason this extra sturdiness.
Okay, so that's it. That's all the questions that we have for today. But if you have more questions that you'd like us to answer, leave them in the comments below. And if you want to deep dive more into any of these questions, we have left a lot of videos linked in the description below. Thank you, Luis.
No problem. I hope you found it interesting.
And until the next one.